You walk into a kitchen, or maybe it's a bakery. The line has long blurred. Somewhere between burnt sugar and damp brick, you pause. The walls sweat. The wallpaper curls at the corners like forgotten letters. And you swear the teacups are watching you. It's late. Or early. No one's keeping time here except the sourdough starter on the shelf. It's been bubbling since last Tuesday. Maybe last century. The room is Victorian. You can tell by the sigh in the floorboards and the faint hint of coal smoke baked into the wooden beams. There's a counter dusted with flour, and beside it, a pantry door. Old wood, iron latch. It creaks like it's remembering something. You open it slowly, and there it is. A skeleton. Not a scary one. More like the kind of skeleton you'd apologize to for disturbing. It's slumped politely against a flour sack, wearing a bonnet that doesn't quite fit. There's a tiny cup of tea balanced on its knee. It won't bite. It can't. But still, you're probably not making it through this day. Before we go further, take a moment to relax your shoulders. Let your breath fall out like a sigh. If you're new here, this is a place where the facts are slow, the humor is accidental, and the pacing is optional. Feel free to like and subscribe if that's your thing. It helps us keep the fire gently crackling. And in the comments, tell us where you're listening from and the time on your clock. We always love seeing which corners of the world drift off to weird bakery facts. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You step back from the pantry. Gently close the door on the skeleton. She'll still be there later. For now, let's rewind the clock just a little. It's London. Not the one with skyscrapers and traffic apps. This one's sticky with soot and smelling of bread that's about to be slightly burnt. The year is 1846, which means two things. The air is still thick with chimney smoke, and someone is definitely putting opium in your cough drops. You are 4. Reasons unclear, a baker's apprentice. Your job? Everything. Stirring batter, hauling flour, watching dough rise, which sounds passive but is in fact a sport, and occasionally chasing rats away with a polite broom. You sleep on flour sacks and dream of crust. At dawn, the ovens growl awake. These are not your modern electric numbers. No buttons, just heat, sit, and a general air of hostility. You feed coal into their open maws like a very sleepy sacrifice. Victorian fire doesn't forgive overproofing. Outside, the city stirs. Someone yells in Welsh. A constable trips on his own boot. Meanwhile, inside the bakery, your master paces the floor. His apron is clean, which means something terrible is about to happen. Check the pantry, he says. You hesitate. You always hesitate. Because here's the thing, some Victorian bakers did keep skeletons in their pantries. Not in a metaphorical way. In an actual way. Mostly decorative. Occasionally legal. See, it was fashionable, at least among the more dramatic corners of society, to have a memento mori in the workplace. A literal reminder of death. In a bakery, that meant a little something to ponder between the raisin buns. Was it morbid? Yes. Was it strange? Of course. Was it entirely real? Historians still debate whether every skeleton was human. You open the pantry again. It's empty now. Just a sack of rye and a smell like dried apples. The skeleton, you think, comes and goes. Weird cultural tidbit of the night? In some parts of 19th century Europe, bakers believed bread would rise better in the presence of a skull. Not scientifically tested. Probably superstition. But what is yeast if not living magic? You close the pantry once more and return to kneading. The dough is soft. It sighs under your hands like a sleepy animal. The air smells faintly of cinnamon and whetstone. Outside, a bell rings. Time to deliver. You grab the tray, still warm, and step into the fog. You walk through a London that feels underwater. Everything muffled, slightly tilted. The cobblestones glisten like spilled ink, and the fog, well, the fog is having a field day. It drapes over gas lamps, curls around your boots, seeps into your lungs like a whispered insult. You're carrying a tray of still steaming scones to the apothecary across the street. Because in this city, everyone needs bread. Even the guy selling arsenic tonics and laudanum lozenges. On the way, you pass a woman selling hot chestnuts from a tin drum. She nods at you. You nod back. A silent alliance formed through heat and carbohydrate. You also pass a cat who may be mayor of this particular alley. His stare is heavy. You adjust your tray. Now, here's the major historical fact for this section. In Victorian England, many bakers doubled as local informants. Why? Because everyone talked while buying bread. Names, debts, illnesses, secrets whispered over biscuits. And the baker? He remembered everything. Flour dusted onto confession. Your master was no exception. He once solved a robbery by remembering who bought 3 plum tarts the day before a church bell went missing. The thief had crumbs in his pocket. Justice was swift if sticky. You duck into the apothecary's shop. It smells like licorice, fear, and something vaguely floral. Shelves of glass bottles catch the gray light. You set the scones on the counter. The apothecary grunts approval and hands you a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. For the skeleton, he mutters. You don't ask. He's probably joking. Probably. Back outside, you stop for a moment. Remember the pantry? Yeah. The one with the skeleton? The weirdest part is that no one else in the bakery talks about it. It's like a cupboard of collective denial. Every new apprentice gets warned once. Don't move the bonnet. That's it. No explanations. Just a nod toward mortality and a very delicate lace ribbon. Scholars have dug through letters, trade logs, even bakery inventories, and still can't agree on how widespread these pantry skeletons really were. Some call it urban legend. Others point to documentation, licenses for anatomical specimens, tax ledgers noting display items. Still others just shrug and say Victorians were weird. Tonight's obscure cultural tidbit: in the 1850s, a London Bakers' Guild issued guidelines about decorative artifacts of historical or anatomical interest in public-facing bakehouses. The wording was vague, and many interpreted this as permission to get theatrical. Your own master once tried to put a skull in the window for Halloween. Sales plummeted. He replaced it with a marzipan pig. Back in the bakery now. The fire hisses. The dough has risen like a smug little cloud. You shape loaves while the pantry door stares in the corner of your vision. You hum. A lullaby from nowhere. Something about barley and bells. Time slows. Flour drifts like snowfall. Somewhere above you in the old wooden beams, something creaks again. Maybe it's just the building breathing. Or maybe it's her adjusting her posture. A thought flickers. What if the skeleton isn't decorative at all? What if she was the baker? But that's probably just the laudanum talking. You tuck the dough into the pans. Slide them into the oven. Close the door. The skeleton, for now, stays asleep. Let her rest. You've got hours of baking left, and the pantry never really closes. You lean against the warm brick of the oven and breathe in slow, the kind of breath that's less about oxygen and more about keeping your soul inside your body. The fire hums behind the iron door, low and steady. It's the only voice in the bakery that never changes its mind. It's almost quiet, except for the ticking of the big brass clock on the wall. The one that's been 3 minutes wrong since the coronation. Not out of protest, just stubbornness. You glance over at the pantry, still closed, still politely unsettling. But tonight, something nags at you, the kind of soft thought that doesn't knock, just lets itself in and rearranges the furniture in your head. What if the skeleton wasn't always a skeleton? That sounds obvious, of course it wasn't. But you know what I mean. Let's rewind even further. Before the bonnet, before the pantry, before the bakery itself. You imagine her because it's definitely a her, let's not argue, walking these same streets. Alive, breathing, buying cinnamon sticks and swatting chimney soot off her sleeves. Maybe she laughed too loudly in tea shops. Maybe she kneaded dough like it owed her money. And then, somehow, she ends up behind a pantry door. You don't ask how. Not tonight. Major historical fact of this section? In the mid-19th century, London faced what was charmingly referred to as the cadaver crisis. Medical schools needed bodies to study, but no one wanted to donate. So bodies were acquired, sometimes by grave robbing, sometimes by darker means. Some went missing. Some ended up in odd places, like bakery pantries. Now, whether your skeletal guest came by way of a shady anatomy dealer or was simply a tribute to the fragility of life, well, historians still debate that too. Some say she was a medical specimen gone astray. Others whisper she was the wife of the baker who once owned this place. He missed her terribly. Or didn't. You brush flour from your sleeves and head toward the back storeroom. This part of the bakery feels older, like it never stopped being a cellar. Stone walls, low ceilings, a door that doesn't close so much as surrender to being shut. Here you check inventory, flour sacks, cracked measuring cups, a half-melted candle that no one claims but everyone uses. And in the corner, because of course there's a corner, you find something new. A pair of shoes. Tiny, neat, worn at the toes. Women's boots. Victorian. Scuffed like they were used for walking away from something important. You pick them up. They're cool, soft, and slightly damp. When you bring them back to the main bakery, you pause. The pantry is open. Not wide open. Just a sliver. Like someone peeked out, saw the weather, and changed their mind. You set the shoes beside the door. A peace offering. Or maybe an apology. You don't speak. But if you did, you might say, "Sorry for interrupting." Weird cultural tidbit? There was a trend amongst some Victorian women to keep a single, beautifully polished shoe on their mantle. A sort of poetic reminder of journeys taken or not taken. Romantic. A little unsettling. Like most Victorian hobbies. You start shaping pastry. Apple tarts this time. The apples are soft and sour the way the baker likes them. You carve thin slices like you're writing letters in fruit. The night deepens. The skeleton stays still. You begin to wonder if she was a baker too. Maybe her name was Eleanor. Maybe it still is. You are, against all odds, still awake. Sort of. Your hands move on autopilot now, folding pastry into slow, sleepy triangles. Your thoughts drift somewhere between cinnamon and curiosity, and somewhere behind you the pantry hums. Not literally, it's just the feeling it gives off, like a cat pretending not to watch you. You set the pastries aside and check the ovens. The loaves are rising beautifully, golden at the edges, swollen like they've heard good news. Now's the hour when London sinks into that strange quiet. Not peace, just a hush. The horses are stabled. The milkmen are dreaming. The ghosts are stretching their legs. This is also the hour when your master retreats to his chair in the corner with his copy of Punch magazine and a cold scone. He doesn't say much, just grunts when the crust is too soft. He's been in this bakery longer than the bricks, it seems. Some say he never leaves. And yet he never mentions the pantry. Not once. Major historical fact of this section? In 1854, a baker named Charles Kingsley published a moral treatise disguised as a children's fairy tale. It involved talking insects, moral decay, and clean bread. It sold very few copies, but did inspire some bakers to start keeping morality relics in their shops. Items to remind apprentices to work honestly. Skeletons included. One such relic? A shriveled hand wearing a wedding ring, tucked in a biscuit tin. Scholars don't talk about that one very much. You decide not to mention it either. The pantry door is now slightly wider. Just a whisper of darkness behind it. You don't panic. Panic is a day job emotion. At night we accept things, like ghosts and taxes. You reach for a broom, mostly for psychological comfort, and edge toward the pantry. You glance in. No skeleton, no bonnet, just a chair, small, wooden, child-sized, and on it a teacup, freshly filled. You blink. Weird cultural tidbit? In some rural English households, it was tradition to leave a teacup out, overnight for the resting spirits of the home. If the tea was disturbed by morning, it meant a visitor had come through peacefully. If not, well, maybe they were still deciding. You back away slowly. The oven pings. Time to pull the bread. Loaves thump hollow and proud under your knuckles. You line them up on the cooling rack, their scent rising like lullabies. The kind that smell like Sunday afternoons and powdered sugar. You hear a soft creak. The pantry door gently closing. Not slamming. Not snapping shut. Just closing. With a kind of grace. You set the last loaf on the rack. Your master snores in the corner. The streets outside curl into dreams. And somewhere behind the walls the skeleton Eleanor maybe is settling in again. Let her rest. She's got time. And so do you. You've never spoken to the skeleton. That would be absurd. You're not that sleep-deprived. Probably. But tonight, after the pantry door closes with such quiet intention, you feel inclined. Not to talk exactly, more like acknowledge. So you give a slight nod in the pantry's direction. Nothing dramatic, just enough for any watching ghost to feel seen but not startled. Outside, the fog has thickened to something you could spread on toast. It slides against the windows in long streaks, casting shadows that flicker like second thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls a confused number of times. 8? 11? It doesn't matter. Time moves differently here. You pour yourself a cup of tea. It's slightly oversteeped, just how you like it. Bitter enough to feel real. The bakery smells like a memory. One of those smells that doesn't belong to you but still reminds you of something safe. Flour, apple, coal smoke, and something else. A whisper of lavender. The kind old women used to sew into their pillowcases to keep the dreams soft. Major historical fact for this section: in Victorian England, many working-class women used lavender and chamomile not just for scent, but to calm the kitchen. Literally. Herbal sachets were hung in corners to discourage arguments, help bread rise, and keep the air sweet in cramped rooms full of fire. You look toward the pantry. There's a faint trace of something dried and floral hanging from the inside of the door. Lavender. The skeleton, you think, was probably a kitchen witch. Or something like it. Not in a magical sense, though who knows, but in that very real, very old way that women have always known how to make food behave and people behave better. You sip your tea and think about her fingers, how they might have moved in dough, how they probably left indentations in butter, how they maybe pinched salt like it was a secret. Weird cultural tidbit: in some Victorian villages, it was said that the best bakers sang to the yeast. Not out loud, just quietly in their heads. A kind of mental rhythm to keep the dough light. If your bread fell flat, it was assumed you'd had a sour thought. Tonight, your bread has risen well. Your thoughts, apparently, are acceptable. You decide to sweep the flour-dusted floor. Not because it's needed, but because it feels respectful. Like brushing your hair before a visit from someone long gone. While you sweep, you hum. You don't realize you're doing it until the tune wraps around your ears like a warm shawl. It's that Barley and Bell's lullaby again. The same one from earlier. You pause. You didn't know you knew all the verses. There's movement behind the pantry door. Not much. Just the faint sound of a chair leg adjusting. Like someone crossing one bony leg over the other. Historians still debate whether these so-called baker skeletons were real women memorialized or merely props sourced from anatomy cellars. There's very little consistent documentation, and no one really wants to dig too deep. Metaphorically and literally, you finish sweeping. The floor sighs beneath your feet. You place a single tart on a plate. Set it near the pantry, just in case. You don't expect it to disappear. But if it does, you won't scream. Probably. At some point, the bakery becomes dreamlike. Or maybe you become more dream than baker. Either way, time has folded into that quiet, paper-thin hour before dawn. When even ghosts nap. The bread has cooled. The tarts have been boxed. The biscuits stare at you with their usual quiet judgment. You sit on the floor, back against the oven, warm through the spine. Your tea has gone cold, but you drink it anyway. There's comfort in a ritual even when it's slightly disappointing. And then, for no reason, you open the pantry door again. She's back. Eleanor, if that's still her name, is seated neatly on the flour sack just as before. Her posture is impeccable. Her bonnet freshly straightened. The teacup you left earlier is empty. Of course it is. Her skull is tilted slightly toward you. Not aggressive. Not curious. Just present. You nod. She doesn't nod back. But then you didn't expect her to. Major historical fact: In some corners of Victorian society, particularly in artisan trades, there was a brief but real movement toward occupational relics. These were tools or symbols left behind by workers who had passed, kept on shelves or in closets as reminders of the craft. In some cases, actual remains were included: fingers, teeth, even the occasional full skeleton, especially if the individual had been considered a master of their trade. There are records, faint, contradictory, uncomfortable, of such relics being passed from one bakery to the next. Part tribute, part superstition, part morbid peer stunt. You wonder if Eleanor was ever known for her bread, if her sourdough made it into local newspapers, if someone once wrote her crust was almost holy. Weird cultural tidbit: the phrase "blessed by the baker" was once used sarcastically in London to mean something was slightly burnt but still delicious. Likely originated from overworked apprentices covering up mistakes by assigning them divine intent. You rest your head back against the oven. There's a strange comfort in her presence now. Not eerie, not threatening, just another part of the bakery. Like the cracked window or the clock that never quite chimes the hour right. You speak aloud, softly, just to see what the air will do with it. Do you miss it? Silence, but not empty silence. The kind of silence that follows a good question. You close the pantry door. Gently. Later, when you check again, the tart will be gone. And you'll pretend not to notice. Let her have it. She earned it. You wake briefly. Or maybe you never really slept. It's that stage of exhaustion where the line between blinking and dreaming gets a little fuzzy. Your back aches in the polite way it always does after a full night in the bakery. And your fingers are dusted in flour like you've been trying to forget something gently. Outside, the first hints of dawn seep into the cracks of the city. Not light exactly, just the idea of light. The fog's still thick, reluctant to let go of its shift. Somewhere, a milk cart rattles by too early for decency. Inside, the oven is still warm, though it hums a little lower now. Quieter, like it's whispering a lullaby to itself. You stretch, sip the last cold mouthful of tea, and consider whether the whole night has been one long hallucination brought on by yeast fumes. But then you glance toward the pantry and see something new. Not Eleanor this time. Not quite. A coat. It hangs from the inside of the pantry door. Small, faded, buttonless. It looks like it's been patched a dozen times by someone with strong fingers and poor eyesight. You didn't put it there. You don't remember seeing it before. You think it might have belonged to a child. Major historical fact. In the mid-1800s, it was common for child laborers to work in bakeries from as young as 6 years old. They fetched coal, swept flour, and carried bread deliveries through streets choked with horses and soot. These bakery boys and girls were often paid in leftover crusts and the occasional coin. Records mention apprentices so young they couldn't reach the counters without standing on overturned flour bins. It wasn't kind work. It was survival. You stare at the coat. It doesn't make you sad. Exactly. Just heavier. Weird cultural tidbit. Some bakeries had blessing ladders. Short, rickety wooden steps kept near the ovens. Not for convenience, but to give young workers a chance to elevate their fortunes. Literally. Stepping up onto the ladder on a Monday was said to bring a week of good bread, good luck, and no burned bottoms. No one's seen one in a century. You wonder if the coat is a gift or a warning. There's flour on the floor. Not unusual, but this patch is different. Small footprints, bare, faint, leading from the pantry toward the oven, then vanishing at the tiles. You don't follow them. You just watch them fade. And when you turn back, the pantry is shut again. Of course it is. You pull the morning bread from the cooling rack. It's perfect. Better than perfect. You didn't even proof it that long. You wonder if you had help. The first customer of the morning is a postman who smells like wet wool and misplaced priorities. He orders 2 seed rolls and mumbles something about fog delays. You nod politely. He doesn't notice your half-dead eyes or the ghostly coat still faintly hanging inside the pantry. Business continues. Slowly, as it always does when the weather can't decide what mood it's in. The bakery fills with warm smells and half-remembered conversations. Crumbs gather in corners like secrets no one wants to clean up. Somewhere in the back, a tray of currant buns tries its best to look useful. You wrap up a parcel of oatcakes for an elderly woman who insists on paying in shillings and stories. She tells you about her mother's bakery, long gone now, where the oven was known to sigh whenever a lie was told nearby. You ask her what it did when someone told the truth. She grins, toothless and proud. It baked better. Major historical fact. In some parts of 19th century England, bakers swore by the concept of truth heat, the belief that ovens responded emotionally to the behavior of the people around them. Some claimed loaves would crack, rise unevenly, or even burn outright if anyone in the bakery was hiding a serious lie. Of course, scholars consider this nonsense. Mostly. Still, your own oven has been suspiciously cooperative today. You step into the back to grab more flour. And pause. The pantry is open again. But this time the skeleton is gone. Not just shifted. Not adjusted. Not relocated. Gone. No bonnet. No bones. No presents. Just the flour sack. And the teacup. Still empty. You check behind the door. Under the shelves. Inside the coal bin. Nothing. You are, as the Victorians might say, mildly discomposed. Weird cultural tidbit. In certain rural communities, people believed that a spirit would only stay in one place for 7 bread risings. After that, it had to move on or risk forgetting why it lingered in the first place. Some households kept a tally of loaves to track a ghost's welcome. You count quickly. You've made 7 loaves since you last saw Eleanor. Exactly 7. You stand in the quiet for a while. Long enough for the oven to let out a small exhale. Long enough to feel the absence settle like dust. You're not sad. But you do miss her. Even if you never really spoke. Even if she never really stayed. You close the pantry door again. This time not gently. This time with respect. And then you return to the counter, smile at the next customer, and serve them a roll that's somehow lighter than air. You thought she was gone. Really, you did. 7 loaves. 7 risings. 7 quiet goodbyes. But when you come back from your break, 10 minutes in the alley with a lukewarm cup of weak tea and a spectacularly judgmental pigeon, you find something strange. The pantry door is open again. Just a little. And on the shelf? A bonnet. Not hers, though. This one's smaller, child-sized, lined in pale blue ribbon. The kind a child might wear to Sunday service or to keep her curls from catching fire around the coal stove. You step closer. There's no skeleton this time. No teacup. Just the bonnet, folded and still warm. You don't ask how you know that, it just is. You touch it. Soft. Threadbare. Familiar in a way that bypasses logic and aim for the ribs instead. Major historical fact, in the Victorian period, mourning garments weren't only for the living. It was common to dress the deceased, especially children, in particular bonnets, veils, and ribbons before burial. These weren't fashion statements. They were emotional bandages. Some families even kept a specific bonnet passed down for this exact purpose. Somehow that feels relevant now. You carry the bonnet to the counter and set it beside the honey buns. You don't want to put it back in the pantry. That feels impolite. You imagine Eleanor standing behind you, arms crossed in bony amusement. Bit on the nose, don't you think? She might say. Weird cultural tidbit. In some northern English towns, bakers once tied small ribbons to loaves sold on certain holidays. Blue for peace, red for love, black for remembrance. No one really agreed on the rules, but the symbolism mattered more than the system. You think maybe Eleanor is giving you a ribbon of her own. Not a haunting. A remembrance. You leave the bonnet where it is. Customers come and go. No one comments. But a small girl, no older than 7, stops in front of it. Doesn't touch. Just looks. Then she smiles. Not at you. At the air behind you. Then she leaves with her mother, clutching a cinnamon bun like it contains the meaning of life. You don't turn around. You don't need to. You already know what's there. And more importantly, what isn't. Later that day, just before dusk, the baker returns from wherever he disappears to during the afternoon. Some say it's a nap. Others suspect a secret poker game with undertakers. He glances around the shop, notices the bonnet on the counter, raises one eyebrow, then says nothing. He never says anything about the pantry. But when you hand him a slice of the seed loaf, he takes it, chews, and mutters she liked it crusty. You pause. She who? He shrugs. You know. You do know. Major historical fact, there are records, scant and largely overlooked, of 19th century apprentices referring to previous bakers by pronouns only. No names. Just her or him, depending on who the oven seemed to be remembering that week. A kind of occupational ghosting that no one wanted to admit aloud. One log from 1862 simply reads, made 5 loaves. He approved. Burnt last one. He disapproved. Oven's cold today. You don't press your master for more. He's already halfway through a crossword he writes himself and never finishes. Instead, you go to sweep the back storeroom. Again. You've swept it 6 times today and somehow it never gets cleaner. Flour is a living thing, apparently. It refuses order. In the corner, you find the shoes again. Remember them? The tiny, scuffed ones that seem to walk in circles? They've moved. Just slightly. One is turned outward now, pointing toward the pantry. And next to it, a small biscuit. Crumpled. Uneaten. Possibly a peace offering. You don't remember dropping it. You sit beside the shoes. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the warmth of the oven settle into your bones like quiet music. Weird cultural tidbit. Some bakers believed that if you whispered to your shoes before bed, they'd walk a blessing into your dreams. Others believed you were just talking to shoes. You consider whispering something. But instead, you gather the shoes and the biscuit and place them gently into the pantry. Not because you expect anything, but because somehow it feels like the right thing to do. The pantry accepts the gift without comment. The door doesn't creak. The skeleton doesn't appear. And yet the air feels satisfied, like something has been fed. You head back to the oven, tuck in the next batch of loaves, and hum that lullaby again. The one about barley and bells. You never learned it, but somehow you know it by heart. The bakery is quieter than usual tonight. Not silent, never silent, but slow, like a record turned just a little too soft. You hear the tick of the brass clock, the lazy hiss of the oven, the distant creak of old wood adjusting to the weight of memory. You roll dough between your palms and listen to the rhythm of your own breathing. Even that feels borrowed now, like the breath is passing through you on its way somewhere else. The bonnet still sits on the counter. No one's moved it. No one's touched it. Even your master glances at it occasionally but says nothing. You're starting to think he said all he'll ever say about anything ever. And maybe that's enough. You pull the next tray of buns from the oven. Perfectly risen. Lightly glazed. You set them down and for a moment you swear the bakery sighs in approval. You glance toward the pantry. Closed. Completely, politely closed. But there's a note on the floor in front of it. A scrap of brown paper, torn at the edge, folded twice. You pick it up. There's no handwriting. Just a faint dusting of flour and what looks like a print, fingers. Small. Child-sized. Like someone pressed it with care. You don't know what it means. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe that's the point. Major historical fact. Paper was expensive in Victorian England, especially for the working class. Bakers reused everything, receipt books, ledger margins, even sugar wrapping. Some apprentices used scraps of paper to write tiny notes, riddles, or sketches, tucking them into cracks in the walls. A few have been found centuries later, badly drawn cats, poorly spelled dreams, lists of things to bake before dying. Historians still debate whether these were genuine journal entries or just the 19th century equivalent of doodling in math class. Weird cultural tidbit: it was believed in some circles that ghosts could read old paper better than new. The logic? Ink soaked in over time, becoming more visible to the other eye. This is the kind of belief no one wrote down, but everyone quietly honored. You fold the note again and tuck it into your apron. You'll pretend to forget it. But you won't. Back at the counter, the oven ticks softly. That lullaby floats up again, barley and bells, and you find yourself singing under your breath. The bakery smells like rising. Not just bread, but time. Something is shifting. You don't know what yet, but it's slow and kind and somehow a little sad. The streets outside are silver now. Fog rolling slow and clean like someone's taken a cloth to the whole city. Gaslights flicker faintly behind windows and even the cobblestones seem to whisper softer tonight. You press your palm to the window pane. It's cool. A little damp. The kind of cold that's not uncomfortable, just honest. There's something settling in you too. Not dread. Not exactly peace either. Something in between. Like an old quilt you've just remembered still fits. You turn back toward the pantry. You don't expect anything. You really don't. And yet, the door is slightly open. Not wide. Just enough to let the warm air drift in. Just enough to say someone thought about you today. You walk toward it slowly, carrying a fresh currant bun. Inside, on the flour sack, you find 3 things. The shoes neatly tied together now with a length of blue ribbon. A flowery handprint on the wall. A note, this time with handwriting. It's shaky, barely legible. But it says, Don't forget to rest the dough. Your chest tightens just a little, not with fear, with memory, or maybe something older than memory. Major historical fact: there were bakeries in Victorian England that passed down recipes only through marginalia notes scribbled in the corners of the workbench, under floorboards, behind cupboard doors. Apprentices learned by reading ghosts. No formal books, just flowery fingerprints and gut instinct. You think maybe Eleanor ran one of those bakeries. You think maybe you're running one now. Weird cultural tidbit: in some early cookbooks, the instruction, rest the dough, was written as let it sleep. A poetic way of saying, leave it alone and trust it knows what to do. You place the currant bun inside the pantry. Fold the shoes and ribbon next to it. And then you close the door. This time completely. No gaps. No slivers. No questions. Just a quiet hand on wood. You step back. The oven glows steady. The bread smells done. And you're starting to feel like maybe you've been apprenticing for someone you never met, but always knew. You wake the next morning with a rye crumb on your cheek and the distinct feeling that someone tucked the tea towel over your shoulders while you slept. You sit up slowly. Your joints creak in protest like a choir of old floorboards. The oven's gone cold, but the warmth still lingers in the air, as if heat has memory, and yours is fond. You check the pantry first, just a glance, just to confirm. It's closed and still, peaceful. You don't open it. Not because you're afraid, but because you understand something now. That door isn't yours anymore. Maybe it never was. Some things you tend to, others you leave alone. It's not absence. It's permission. On the counter, where the bonnet once rested, you find a single poppy seed. Small, slightly oily, easily missed, but unmistakably placed. Major historical fact: in Victorian kitchens, poppy seeds were considered a symbol of restful sleep and quiet endings. Bakers added them not only for taste but for intention. Some even sprinkled them in doorways to calm the air after a death in the house. You think maybe this one was left for you, or maybe for her, or maybe for the dough. You start your day's prep slowly. There's no rush, no chaos. You proof the bread gently, almost lovingly. You let the scones sit an extra 5 minutes on the counter because they look like they need it. Customers come and go. One man, nose red from the cold, picks up a muffin, sniffs it, and mutters. Smells like someone remembered something. He doesn't elaborate. You nod as if he said something wise. And maybe he has. Weird cultural tidbit: some 19th century bakers believed you should never bake on an argument. Not because of superstition, but because the bread would learn your tone and pass it on to whoever ate it. Your bread today tastes like forgiveness. Not dramatic forgiveness. Not cinematic. The quiet kind. The kind you feel after someone finally tells you they understand why you stayed. Your master asks no questions about the pantry, but he pats your shoulder when you get the crust just right. You think that's all the conversation he knows how to give. And that's enough. By nightfall, the bakery breathes like an old house with a good memory. The shelves are nearly empty. The loaves have all gone home to kitchens and cupboards, wrapped in brown paper like soft promises. You clean up slowly, methodically. You hum again, though the melody's changed slightly. less like a lullaby, more like a memory humming itself through your mouth. You sweep the floor not because it's dirty, but because that's what Eleanor would have done. The pantry stays closed and still, but when you pass it, the air feels warm again. Lavender and flower and something older than either. Major historical fact: the term ghost oven appeared in some Victorian household manuals. It referred to an old, unused oven that still retained heat long after the fire had died. If your kitchen has a ghost oven, one manual warned, do not disrespect it. Bake shortbread in it. You never found that manual, but you understand it perfectly. The oven glows for no reason now. You haven't lit it in hours, and yet it holds warmth, like a thank you or a farewell. Weird cultural tidbit. Some bakers left the last roll of the day unsold. They'd place it in the highest cupboard, for those who might still pass by after death. It was a sign of hospitality, and superstition, and maybe kindness too. Tonight you tuck one last biscuit onto the top shelf. Not for Eleanor. Not even for the child whose shoes you placed beside her. Just for the idea that someone somewhere might still be walking home. You turn out the lights, pull on your coat, and just before you lock up, you glance one last time at the pantry. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. Everything it needed to say has already been said. The oven cools, the dough rests, and the ghost is home. It's morning again. A full week has passed since you last saw the skeleton. You keep track by the rise of the sourdough and the slump of your own shoulders. By now, the bakery's rhythm has returned to its usual slow waltz. Flour, fire, tea, repeat. And yet, something lingers, not in a spooky way. The opposite, actually. The bakery feels lighter now. Not emptier, just less burdened. Like someone finally put down a memory they'd been carrying in their bones too long. The pantry still stands where it always did. But you don't think of it the same way anymore. You still clean around it. You still avoid letting the cat get too curious. But the fear is gone. It's been replaced with something quieter. Something respectful. Like an old photo in a worn frame. You don't touch it often, but you'd notice if it went missing. Major historical fact. In 1871, a group of apprentice bakers in Yorkshire documented their bakery tools with small charcoal drawings on the wall behind the oven. Not for inventory, just for remembrance. Names were written beside them. Edwin, age 12, Mags, 10.5, and couldn't whistle. No one knows who they were. The drawings were discovered during a renovation in 1993. You've started your own version. In the back pantry, scratched lightly in chalk behind a bag of rye flour, you've written a name. Eleanor. Just that. No title. No joke. No context. She knows who she is. Weird cultural tidbit. Victorian bakers believed the first loaf you sliced after someone's passing would tell you if they made it to the other side. If it sliced clean, they were at peace. If it crumbled, well, better try again tomorrow. Your loaf today cuts like silk. The master nods when he sees it, doesn't say a word, but he cuts himself a slice. Then he adds another to a small plate and, without looking at you, sets it on the counter beside the pantry. Neither of you watches what happens to it. You don't need to. By now you understand. Some people pass on. Others stay. But the ones who matter most? They rise with the bread. Wind down. Now the bakery sleeps. The ovens have dimmed. The shelves are bare. Only the soft scent of baked apples and browned butter lingers, curling around the corners like old stories. Outside, the fog has finally wandered off. The city exhales. Quiet settles in layers, gentle and cool and just heavy enough to keep you in place. You sit by the oven, arms folded across your apron, head tilted back against the warm brick. There's a rhythm in your breathing now that wasn't there before. Like something inside you finally clicked into place. Like rest is no longer an accident, but a reward. The pantry remains closed. Still. Steady. Not waiting. Just being. And you, well, you don't need answers anymore. You're not here to solve. You're here to keep the fire burning, to flour the counters, to hum the lullaby of barley and bells. The ghost has moved on. Or maybe she moved in. Either way, the bakery is full again. Not of people, but of presence, of stories, of peace. You lean back further. The warmth behind you is slow and deep, like the kind of sleep that doesn't ask questions. Your eyelids get heavier. Your hands relax. The clock doesn't tick anymore. It just listens. And somewhere, tucked into the dark corners of flour sacks and teacups, someone hums the tune back to you. Not loud, not even clear, but enough. Enough to carry you out of the day. Enough to lead you gently into whatever dream waits next. So close your eyes, breathe deep, and let the dough rest. You've earned it.